The maternity ward at Swedish Medical Center in Denver, Colorado felt hushed for an early weekday morning, the kind of quiet that exists only between shift changes and the visiting hours. Outside the tall hospital window, the sky was just beginning to lighten, a soft blue spreading solely over the distant outline of the Rockies. Thin winter sunlight slipped through the blinds in narrow bands, settling across the muted beige walls and the polished floor that reflected everything vaguely, like water at rest. The room smelled clean but lived in, a mix of disinfectant, fresh cotton sheets, and the faint metallic scent that always lingered in hospitals no matter how new they were. A monitor near my bed clicked and hummed steadily, its green lines rising and falling in rhythm with my body. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rolled by, its wheels squeaking softly, then disappearing again into silence. I lay on the bed with my head turned slightly toward the window, my dark hair damp against the pillow, my hospital gown clinging uncomfortably to my back. Sweat traced slow paths down my temples and along my jawline as another contraction tightened deep in my body. I grabbed the sides of the mattress, my fingers curling into the fabric, grounding myself as the pain surged and then slowly released its grip. My chest rose and fell unevenly as he focused on breathing, counting silently the way he had practiced for months. My heart was pounding hard, not only from the physical strain but from the weight of what was about to happen. Every sensation felt sharper, louder, more permanent. The air itself seemed heavier, as if the room understood that something irreversible was unfolding. For years, he had pictured this moment in small, quiet flashes. The sound of my baby's first cry, the warmth of a tiny body placed against my chest, the instant when life split cleanly into before and after. Now that moment was no more longer abstract or distant. It was here, pressing in on me from every side, carried in each contraction and every breath. Despite the discomfort, a deep sense of anticipation settled in my bones. This pain had a purpose. This room, this morning, this exact place in time was where he was about to become a mother. And as he stared at the pale light on the wall and he braced myself for what came next, he believed with absolute certainty that everything he had waited for was finally within reach. My name is Allison Marie Harper, and at the time my story truly began, he was 32 years old. He had been born in Fort Collins, Colorado, and he raised just outside the city in a stretch of land where the neighborhood slowly gave way to open fields, gravel roads, and the long views of the foothills. It was not isolated enough to feel lonely, but it was quiet enough that you learned how to listen. He spent my childhood surrounded by wide skies, and the steady rhythm of a place where people woke up early and he went to bed tired. Our home was a modest farmhouse built decades before he was born, with palisading that needed repainting more often than my parents could afford and a wraparound porch that sagged slightly at one corner. The floors creaked no matter how carefully you walked, and every room carried the faint scent of wood, laundry detergent, and whatever my mother had cooked that evening. Nothing about the house was impressive, but everything about it felt dependable. It had sheltered 3 generations of my family, and it held our lives without asking much in return. My father, Robert Collins, worked as a maintenance supervisor for a regional water treatment facility. His job was physically demanding and often thankless, but he never complained. He left the house before sunrise most mornings with a thermos of black coffee and he returned home just before dinner, his boots dusty and his shoulders stiff. My mother, Elaine Collins, worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a local agricultural cooperative. She balanced numbers during the day and he balanced our family the rest of the time, making sure meals were ready, homework was done, and the house felt calm even when money was tight. They were not affectionate in loud or showy ways, so were no more dramatic decorations of love, no more grand gestures. Instead, love showed up in practical forms. My father fixed what was broken. My mother remembered what mattered. They sat together at the kitchen table every evening, talking quietly about their day, sometimes holding hands without realizing they were doing it. Growing up in that environment taught me that love could be steady and unremarkable and still be real. He was an only child, which meant he learned early how to entertain myself. He spent hours reading library books on the porch, watching storms roll in from the mountains, or helping my mother sort receipts at the kitchen table. He learned responsibility young. If something needed to be done, you did it without being asked twice. That mindset followed me into adulthood and he shaped the way he approached every decision he made. School came easily to me, not because he was exceptionally gifted, but because he was disciplined. He liked structure. He liked knowing what was expected and meeting those expectations. Teachers described me as reliable, thoughtful, and reserved. He was not the loudest voice in the room, but he listened carefully and he remembered details. He carried that same approach into friendships. He did not have men, but the ones he had lasted. When he was 16, my grandmother suffered a stroke. He spent weeks at the hospital after school, sitting quietly beside her bed while nurses came and went. He watched the way they spoke to her, how they explained things slowly, how their presence seemed to steady her even when her body felt unfamiliar to her. Something shifted inside me during those visits. He realized that care, real care, could change how a moment felt even when it could not change the outcome. That realization stayed with me. By the time he graduated high school, he knew he wanted a career that offered both purpose and security. Nursing felt like the right choice. It was practical. It was respected. It offered health insurance, a steady paycheck, and the chance to help people during the most vulnerable moments of their lives. He enrolled in the nursing program at Colorado State University and he moved into a small apartment near campus. For the first time, he was living on my own, responsible for every meal, every bill, every decision. College was demanding, but he thrived on the challenge. He worked part-time as a server at a family-owned diner to cover expenses, studied late into the night, and he learned how to manage exhaustion without letting it defeat me. Clinical rotations were intense, emotionally and physically, but they confirmed that he had chosen the right path. He was calm under pressure. He noticed small changes in patients. He took pride in doing my job well. After graduation, he accepted a position at a community hospital in Aurora, Colorado. The work was fast-paced and often overwhelming, but it grounded me. There was comfort in the routine of 12-hour shifts, charting notice, and moving from room to room knowing exactly what was required of me. Nursing gave my life a clear shape. It also gave me a sense of independence that he valued deeply. He met Mark Harper when he was 27. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a backyard barbecue in Lakewood. He was easy to talk to, with a calm confidence and a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. He worked in logistics for an agricultural supply company, managing transportation schedules and the inventory flow across several states. His job was not glamorous, but he spoke about it with pride, and he admired it. Our relationship unfolded slowly. We dated for over a year before moving in together. There were no more dramatic highs or lows, just a steady progression that felt safe. Mark was reliable. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered birthdays and he returned phone calls. After growing up in a household where consistency mattered more than excitement, that meant everything to me. We rented a small townhouse near Centennial, close enough to both of our jobs to make commuting manageable. Our life together was simple. We cooked dinner at home most nights, watched movies on the couch, and he spent weekends running errands or visiting my parents. We talked about traveling more, about seeing the coast, about visiting national parks we had only read about. Those conversations always ended with us saying we would get to it eventually. Financially, we were careful. Between my nursing salary and his logistics position, we covered our expenses comfortably but without much excess. We paid our bills on time. We contributed to savings. We drove reliable cars that were already paid off. There was satisfaction in that kind of stability, even if it lacked excitement. He believed we were building something solid, something that would last. When Mark proposed, it was quiet and understated. He asked me during our walk through Washington Park on a cool autumn evening. There was no more crowd, no more photographer, no more spectacle. He simply stopped walking, took my hands, and he asked if he wanted to build a life with him. He sighed yes without hesitation. At the time, it felt like the most natural decision he had ever made. We married the following summer in a small ceremony attended by close family and friends. My parents cried softly during the vows. I remember thinking how proud they looked, not just of me, but of the life they had helped me create. After the wedding, life continued much as it had before. We settled into marriage easily. There were adjustments, of course, but nothing that felt unmanageable. Becoming a mother was something he had always wanted, but he approached it with the same careful planning applied to everything else. He wanted to be ready emotionally, financially, and practically. He waited until he felt secure in my career and confident in my marriage. When we decided to try for a baby, it felt like the final piece of a well-organized plan falling into place. Pregnancy did not come immediately. Months passed, then more. He tracked cycles, scheduled appointments, and he tried not to let disappointment take root. As a nurse, he understood the biology, but understanding did not make waiting easier. When he finally saw the positive test, he sat on the edge of the bathtub and he cried quietly, overwhelmed by relief more than excitement. Throughout my pregnancy, he continued working, adjusting my shifts as my body changed. My coworkers supported me. Patients congratulated me. My parents checked in constantly. Mark attended appointments when his schedule allowed. From the outside, everything looked exactly as it should. Inside, my focus narrowed to the life growing within me. He imagined what kind of mother he wanted to be. He thought about the home he would create, the routines he would establish, the kind of love he would offer. Motherhood represented fulfillment, continuity, and purpose. It felt like the natural extension of the life he had been building since childhood. By the time he reached my due date, He believed he was standing at the threshold of everything he had worked for. A stable career, a dependable marriage, a child who would know laughing quiet, consistent ways. He had waited patiently for this chapter, convinced that careful planning guaranteed a steady outcome. What he did not yet understand was that even the most thoughtfully constructed lives can shift without warning. And sometimes, the foundation you trust the most is the one that changes first. Labor did not arrive the way it does in movies, sudden and dramatic, with rushing footsteps and raised voices. It arrived quietly, almost politely, in the early hours of the morning, like a persistent knock that refused to be ignored. At first, he thought the tightness in my lower butt was just another wave of discomfort, the kind he had been feeling on Andy all for days. He shifted in bed, changed positions, and he waited for it to pass. When it returned, sharper and more deliberate, he checked the clock and he noted the time without urgency. By the third contraction, he knew there was a rhythm to it, a purpose. He woke Mark gently, placing my hand on his arm and telling him it was time. He sat up quickly, suddenly alert, his face pale in the dim bedroom light. We moved through the house quietly, almost reverently, as if speaking too loudly might disturb something delicate. He showered. He packed the last few items into the hospital bag we had checked and rechecked for weeks. The drive to the hospital was calm, Denver's streets still mostly empty, the city holding its breath before the day began. At Swedish Medical Center, everything moved at a measured pace. Paperwork, monitors, vital signs. Nurses introduced themselves with warm smiles and efficient hands. He changed into a hospital gown and he climbed into the bed that would become my world for the next several hours. The contraction strengthened slowly, building like waves that gave me just enough time to recover before the next one arrived. He breathed through them, focusing on the techniques he had practiced, grounding myself in the knowledge that my body knew what to do. Mark took the chair beside the bed, close enough that our knees nearly touched. At first, he tried to be helpful in small, practical ways. He held my hand during contractions. He offered sips of water. He asked the nurse questions about timing and the progress. But as the hours passed, something in his demeanor shifted. His movements became less sure. His responses grew shorter. He sat back more often, his shoulders slightly hunched, his gaze drifting away from me and toward the floor or the wall. I told myself it was nerves. This was his first child too. He had never been comfortable in medical settings, and the hospitals made him uneasy even on the best days. I reminded myself that people react to stress differently. Not everyone shows it the same way. Some people grow quiet. Some people retreat inward. There was nothing unusual about that. Still, he noticed things. He checked his phone more often than seemed necessary. At first, he assumed it was work-related. His job involved constant coordination, and even though he had told his supervisor he would be unavailable, habits are hard to break. The screen lit up briefly, casting a pale glow across his face, then went back again as he turned it face down on his thigh or slipped it into his pocket. Each time he caught the movement out of the corner of my eye, a faint tension tightened in my chest. It was not suspicion, not yet. It was more like a question forming without words. He tried to ignore it. Labor requires focus, and he could not afford distractions. He closed my eyes during contractions and he concentrated on my breathing, counting slowly, reminding myself that every surge was bringing me closer to meeting my baby. The room itself was calm. The lighting was soft, dimmed at my request. The steady beeping of the monitor marked time in a way that felt both comforting and relentless. Nurses came and went, checking my progress, adjusting pillows, offering encouragement. Outside the window, the sky shifted from early morning blue to a pale, clouded gray. Hours passed without ceremony. Mark remained beside me, physically present but increasingly distant. When he reached for his hand, he held it, but his grip felt loose, distracted. When he spoke the in-between contractions, his responses lagged by a second too long, as if he were catching up to the conversation. He asked him if he was okay. He nodded quickly and decided he was fine, just tired. He wanted to believe him. Pain has a way of narrowing your world. As the contractions intensified, everything else faded to the edges of my awareness. My body worked hard, muscles tightening and releasing with relentless determination. Sweat dampened my hairline and soaked the thin hospital pillow. My breathing grew louder, more deliberate. He focused on the ceiling tiles, on the sound of my own voice as he counted through each wave. Between contractions, during those brief moments of fragile calm, my mind wandered despite my efforts. He thought about the nursery at home, the pale yellow walls and the crib Mark and he had assembled together one Saturday afternoon. He thought about the tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers, washed and ready. He thought about my parents, likely pacing their kitchen, waiting for updates. These thoughts steadied me, anchored me in the life waiting on the other side of this pain. But each time he opened my eyes, there was Mark, staring down at his phone again. He never smiled at it. He never laughed. His expression was tense, jaw tight, brow furrowed. When he noticed me looking, he would quickly lap the screen and turn it face down, his movements abrupt, almost guilty. He avoided my gaze afterward, focusing instead on the nurse or the monitor or the floor. A small voice inside me whispered that something was wrong. He pushed the thought away. This was not the time for doubt. Hospitals amplify emotions. Stress distorts perception. I reminded myself that we had been together for years, that we had built a life rooted in trust and routine. One strange day, one unfamiliar behavior, did not undo that. I told myself that my body was under strain, and that my mind was searching for meaning where there was none. As labor progressed, the intervals between contractions shortened. The pain sharpened, demanding my full attention. I requested medication, and the anesthesiologist arrived with calm professionalism, explaining each step before administering the epidural. Relief spread gradually, softening the edges of the pain and allowing me to breathe more easily. With the immediate intensity dulled, awareness returned. I noticed the room again. I noticed Mark again. He had moved farther away, standing now near the window instead of sitting beside me. His phone was in his hand, held low, as if he did not want anyone else to see the screen. The light from it reflected vaguely in the glass. I watched him without speaking, a strange heaviness settling in my stomach. I asked him who he was texting. He hesitated before answering, just long enough for the silence to stretch uncomfortably. Then he sighed. It was work, that his supervisor was checking in. His voice sounded tight, rehearsed. He did not meet my eyes as he spoke. He slid the phone into his pocket and he crossed his arms, leaning butt against the wall. He nodded and he said nothing. Confrontation felt impossible in that moment. He was tired. He was vulnerable. He was exposed in ways he had never been before. He needed him to be present, steady, reliable. He could not risk disrupting what little equilibrium he had. Time blurred. The nurse checked my dilation and he smiled, telling me he was making good progress. The doctor was notified. Preparations began quietly, efficiently. There was a sense of anticipation in the room, a subtle shift as everyone moved with purpose. Mark returned to the chair beside me, his phone silent for a while. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit he recognized. He asked if he needed anything. I shook my head and he closed my eyes, letting the hum of the room wash over me. Underneath the excitement, beneath the undeniable miracle unfolding in my body, unease lingered. It was not loud or dramatic. It did not announce itself clearly. It was more like a low vibration, a sense that something was misaligned, that the room held more than one truth. He thought about how often women are told to trust their instincts. He had always believed he did. He trusted my judgment in work, in relationships, in life. Yet here he was, questioning my own perceptions, telling myself to ignore the discomfort because it was inconvenient, because it did not fit the narrative he had prepared. Another contraction came, stronger than the last, and he focused on it, letting it pull me fully into the present. The nurse encouraged me, reminding me that he was close now, that soon, very soon, everything would change. Mark stood when the doctor entered, moving automatically, as if following a script he had memorized. He took his place near my shoulder, ready to support me. His face was pale, his eyes distant, but he smiled when the doctor spoke. It was a careful smile, one that did not quite reach his eyes. He reached for his hand again, and this time his grip tightened, almost painfully so. He wondered if he was holding on to me or to himself. He wondered what thoughts were racing through his mind, what messages waited unread or unsent in his pocket. He told myself that whatever was happening could wait. This moment belonged to something bigger. My body bore down, guided by instinct and the encouragement. The room filled with purposeful voices, with movement and focus. There was no more space left for questions, only for effort. Even as he pushed, even as the final moments of labor demanded everything he had, that quiet sense of unease remained. It did not overwhelm me. It did not distract me. It simply existed, woven into the experience, a shadow cast alongside the light. He did not yet know what it meant. He did not yet understand how deeply it would matter. All he knew, in those final moments before my baby entered the world, was that Jay and the uncertainty had arrived together, and neither was willing to wait its turn. The moment itself did not announce its arrival with grandeur or warning. It emerged from the tension of effort, from the final surge of strength my body gathered from somewhere deeper than thought. 1 second, the room was filled with instructions, pressure, and concentrated urgency. The next, everything changed. There was a brief pause, almost imperceptible, like the world inhaling. Then my daughter cried. It was not the thin, uncertain sound he had imagined in quiet moments during my pregnancy. It was loud and forceful. A clear declaration that shook through the room, and he claimed it completely. The cry echoed off the walls, sharp and full, alive in a way that made my heart leap painfully in my chest. It startled me, not because it was frightening, but because it was so strong, so sure, so undeniable. In that instant, every sensation collided at once. Relief rushed through me first, warm and overwhelming. Loosening muscles he had not realized were still clenched. The pain that had dominated my body for hours receded abruptly, replaced by a whiff of disbelief so intense it made me dizzy. He sucked in a breath that felt deeper than any he had taken before, as if my lungs were finally expanding to their full capacity. He heard voices around me, the doctor's calm affirmation, the nurse's bright reassurance, but they sounded distant, muffled, like they were coming from the other side of water. The cry filled everything. It filled the room. It filled my ears. It filled something inside me that had been waiting quietly for years. Tears streamed down my face before he was even aware he was crying. They came hot and fast, blurring my vision until the ceiling lights fractured into soft halos. My chest shook with silent sobs that felt closer to laughter than sadness. He tried to speak, to say something meaningful, but no more words came. None were necessary. The nurse moved quickly but gently, her hands practiced and careful. She wiped my daughter clean and then, without ceremony, placed her directly against my chest. The weight of her surprised me. She was solid and real, not the fragile, abstract idea he had carried for 9 months, but a living, breathing human being with warmth and heft and presence. Her skin was slick and warm, pressed against my own, and the sensation sent another surge of emotion through me so powerful it stole my breath. He instinctively curled my arms around her, afraid for a fleeting moment that she might disappear if he did not hold on tightly enough. Her tiny body fit against me as if it belonged her, as if it had always known that this was where it would land. Her cry softened as she settled, though it did not disappear entirely. It became a rhythmic sound, rising and falling, punctuated by sharp breaths that caught in her small chest. Her fists were clenched tightly near her face, knuckles pale with effort, her arms moving in short, determined jerks. There was nothing tentative about her. Everything about her spoke of will. He laughed then, a sound that burst out of me unexpectedly, half hysterical and half joyful. It felt strange and wonderful to laugh while crying, to feel my face stretched between two extremes at once. The laughter surprised me, but it also felt right, as if my body needed to release everything it had been holding. He lowered my head slightly, my forehead brushing the fine, damp hair at the top of her head. She smelled like warmth and newness and something elemental he could not name. It was not the clean scent of soap or linen, but something deeper, something instinctive. My hands trembled as he touched her back, my fingers tracing the curve of her spine, marveling at the fact that this small form had existed inside me just moments ago. Tame walked around us. The room did not disappear, but it faded into a softer version of itself. The beeping monitors continued their steady rhythm. The nurses moved efficiently, checking vitals, speaking quietly to one another. The doctor offered congratulations and he stepped back, yet none of it felt urgent anymore. None of it demanded my attention. All of my focus narrowed to the weight on my chest, the warmth of her skin, the sound of her breathing mingling with my own. He looked at her face for the first time, really looked, and he felt something inside me settle into place. Her eyes were closed tightly, lashes dark and damp against her cheeks. Her nose was small and slightly flattened, her mouth wide and expressive even at rest. There was a seriousness to her expression, as if she had arrived already burdened with the importance of her own existence. She shifted slightly, her head turning, her cheek pressing into my skin. The movement was instinctive, unthinking, and it sent a rush of protectiveness through me so fierce it almost hurt. My body responded before my mind could catch up. Arms tightening, shoulders curving around her in a shield he had never practiced but somehow knew how to form. He whispered her name, the one Mark Andy had chosen months ago, testing how it felt in my mouth now that it belonged to someone real. Saying it aloud made my throat tighten again. The name was no more longer theoretical. It was hers. Emotion surged in unpredictable waves. Pride rose first, sharp and bright. He had done this. My body had done this. Against doubt, against fear, against exhaustion, he had brought her into the world. That knowledge filled me with a quiet confidence he had never experienced before. Then came deep and humbling. He was holding an entirely new life, one that had not existed in the world until this exact moment. The enormity of that responsibility pressed down on me, not as fear, but as reverence. He felt suddenly small and vast at the same time. Acutely aware of my place in something much larger than myself, gratitude followed close behind. Gratitude for the nurses whose steady hands had guided me. Gratitude for my body, imperfect and strained but capable. Gratitude for this moment that felt both fleeting and eternal. Gratitude so intense it bordered on pain. He became dimly aware of Mark's presence beside me. He leaned closer, his face pale and stunned, eyes fixed on our daughter. For a moment, he searched his expression for a reflection of what he was feeling, hoping to see the same unguarded wonder mirrored but at me. He smiled, his mouth trembling slightly, and he reached out to touch her arm with one finger, as if afraid of startling her. He wanted to believe that this sound, this moment, this undeniable miracle, would anchor us both. that whatever unease had lingered earlier would dissolve in the face of something so profound. He wanted to believe that joy, once it arrived in this form, would be strong enough to eclipse everything else. The nurse adjusted the blankets around us, ensuring my daughter's small body stayed warm. She spoke softly, explaining what she was doing, but he barely registered the words. My attention was fixed on the rise and the fall of my daughter's chest. On the way, her fingers slowly relaxed, whirling from tight fists into open hands. He traced one tiny finger with my own, overwhelmed by its delicacy. Her skin was softer than anything he had ever touched, impossibly smooth. When my finger brushed her palm, her fingers curled reflexively around it, her grip surprisingly firm. The sensation sent a jolt through me, grounding me completely in the present. That single, instinctive grasp felt like a promise. He felt something inside me open fully then, a door he had kept closed without realizing it. All the careful planning, the patience, the waiting, the imagining, it all culminated here. This was not the future he had envisioned in abstract terms. This was now. This was real. This was happening in my arms. The room buzzed softly with activity as the nurses completed their checks. But my world had shrunk to the size of my daughter. He spoke to her quietly, words tumbling out without thought. He told her she was safe. He told her she was loved. He told her he was here. The sound of my own voice surprised me, steady and sure, as if some deeper part of me had taken over. My body felt heavy and elate all at once. Exhaustion pressed into my limbs, but it was a distant sensation, dulled by adrenaline and the emotion. He was aware of the soreness, the weakness, the aftermath of labor, yet none of it mattered. Pain had lost its significance. It had served its purpose and he retreated. As the minutes passed, my daughter's cries softened further, turning into quiet sounds that vibrated against my chest. Each breath she took felt like a small miracle. Each movement reassured me that she was here, alive and strong. He realized then that this sound, her first cry, was the one he had been waiting for without fully understanding it. It was not just confirmation of her arrival. It was proof that my life had crossed a threshold it could never return from. That sound marked the beginning, not just for her, but for me. In that hospital room, surrounded by poly walls and the soft lights, happiness did not arrive as fireworks or sudden clarity. It arrived as weight and the warmth, as tears and the laughter tangled together, as a small, determined voice pressed against my skin. It arrived quietly but decisively, settling into my chest with a certainty he could feel in my bones. For the first time in my life, he did not question whether he was ready. Holding my daughter, listening to her breathe, he knew with absolute clarity that this moment had chosen me just as surely as he had chosen it. The room began to change slowly, not with any sudden movement or announcement, but with absence. One by one, the nurses stepped by after finishing their checks, their voices lowering, their presence becoming less central. The doctor offered a final congratulations and he left quietly. The door closed with a soft click, and the bustle that had filled the space moments earlier dissolved into a fragile calm. It was just the three of us now. The lights were dimmed further, casting gentle shadows along the walls. My daughter rested against my chest, wrapped snugly in a hospital blanket, her breathing steady and warm. Her small body rose and fell with a rhythm that felt hypnotic, anchoring me to the present. He was still floating in the afterglow of her arrival, suspended in a state where pain had faded and the time felt stretched thin and forgiving. He expected this moment to be simple. He expected Mark to sit beside me, to reach out again, to marvel quietly at the life we had made. He expected shared whispers, plans spoken softly, the beginning of a new chapter written in gentle tones. My mind was already moving forward, already rearranging itself around this new center of gravity. Instead, Mark shifted in his chair. The sound was small, the scrape of metal against linoleum barely audible, but it shook through the quiet like a disruption in music. He felt it more than he heard it. My eyes flicked toward him instinctively. He leaned closer, not with excitement, not with awe, but with a heftiness that put the ire down around us. His face looked drained of color, hollow in a way that made his features seem sharper, almost unfamiliar. His eyes did not go to our daughter. They stayed fixed somewhere between my shoulder and the edge of the bed, as if meeting my gaze directly required more courage than he had left. He sighed my name. He had sighed it thousands of times before, casually, affectionately, sometimes impatiently, sometimes with humor. But this time it sounded different. It came out slow and careful, weighted with something he did not recognize at first. It did not sound like love or joy. It sounded like resignation. A cold sensation spread through my chest, sudden and unmistakable. My heart sank before my mind could catch up, as if some deeper instinct had already understood what was coming and he was bracing itself accordingly. He felt my grip on my daughter tighten slightly, my arms curling around her without conscious thought. Mark swallowed hard, There's something I need to tell you, he sighed. The words themselves were simple, almost ordinary, but the way he sighed them stripped the warmth from the room. His voice wavered, not with emotion, but with strain, like someone forcing themselves to step forward when every instinct screamed to stay still. He waited. He did not respond. He did not ask what he meant. A strange calm settled over me, thin and brittle, the kind that arrives just before something breaks. My mind raced through possibilities with clinical speed. Bad news from work. A family emergency. Something logistical. Something unfortunate but manageable. Not this. Never this. He took another breath, longer this time, as if gathering fragments of courage scattered throughout the room. He glanced briefly at our daughter, then looked away again, his jaw tightening. He didn't plan for this. He sighed quickly, as if speed might soften the impact. He never meant for it to happen like this. The words landed oddly, disconnected from any clear meaning. He felt a flicker of irritation rise beneath the fear. What had he not planned? What was he talking about? Then he sighed it. I'm in love with someone else. The sentence did not explode. It did not shatter the room or ring loudly in my ears. It settled instead, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on my chest until it became hard to breathe. For a moment, he was not sure he had heard him correctly. The words felt unreal, like something spoken in a dream where language loses its logic. He stared at him, my expression blanked, my mind desperately searching for context, for correction, for any explanation that would make those words less absolute. He kept talking. It's been going on for months. He sighed. He didn't want it to. He tried to stop it. He swore he did. Each sentence layered itself on top of the last, building something monstrous and incomprehensible. Months. While he was pregnant. While we planned. While we prepared a nursery. While he trusted. The room felt smaller. The walls inching closer. The air thinning. My ears rung softly, a high-pitched sound that made it difficult to focus on anything beyond the immediate sensation of shock rippling through my body. He looked down at my daughter. She slept peacefully, utterly unaware of the words being spoken above her small head. Her face was relaxed, lips slightly parted, her chest rising and falling in that steady rhythm he had memorized already. She was warm and real and solid, the undeniable proof of everything he thought my life was built on. The contrast was unbearable. He waited for anger to surge, for tears to spill, for some dramatic reaction to assert itself. Instead, there was only stillness, a quiet, internal collapse that made everything feel distant and muted. He felt suspended between two realities, one defined by the warmth of the child in my arms, the other by the sudden, violent unraveling of everything he believed to be true. Mark continued speaking, his words tumbling out unevenly. He didn't know how to tell you. He sighed. He didn't want to ruin this. He thought maybe he could figure it out on my own. His voice cracked slightly then, and he wondered briefly if he expected sympathy. The thought was so surreal it almost made me laugh. Instead, my throat tightened, sealing off any sound before it could escape. Ruin this. The irony pressed against me sharply, as if this moment, of all moments, could be ruined by honesty rather than betrayal. He shifted slightly on the bed, adjusting my daughter's position to keep her comfortable. The small, practical movement felt grounding, something he could control when everything else had slipped beyond my reach. My hands moved with purpose, muscle memory guiding them, while my mind struggled to keep up. He finally looked back at Mark. His eyes were wet now, his expression strained and pleading. He looked like someone awaiting judgment, someone who knew the verdict would not be kind. Yet there was something else or too, something harder to name. Relief, perhaps, as if speaking the truth aloud had lifted a burden from his shoulders and he placed it squarely on mine. He felt a wave of sympathy rise unexpectedly, quick and unwelcome, not for his situation, but for the weakness it revealed. For the smallness of his timing, for the choice to bring this truth into a room where Joe had barely settled. That sympathy vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by something colder and more resolute. How long? He asked quietly. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and distant, like it belonged to someone else. He did not ask who, he did not ask why. Some part of me knew the details would only sharpen the pain, carve it into something more permanent. He hesitated, then answered. Since last fall. The room spun slightly, and he tightened my hold on my daughter again, grounding myself in her warmth. Last fall. It counted backwards automatically. Appointments, ultrasounds, shared dinners, quiet evenings on the couch. All of it recontextualized in an instant, each memory cracking under the weight of this new truth. He thought about the nights he came home late, the weekends he claimed he was busy, the phone he always turned face down, the uneasy had dismissed as stress, as imagination, as my own tendency to overthink. The realization did not come with drama. It came with a dull ache, the slow understanding that my instincts had been whispering long before my mind was willing to listen. What are you saying? He asked finally. He exhaled shockily. He don't know. He sighed. He didn't want a day to be like this. He just couldn't keep lying. The words echoed hollowly. Could not keep lying. As if the lie itself had reached some natural expiration point. independent of the choice to sustain it. He looked at our daughter again, studying her face with an intensity that bordered on desperation. He memorized the curve of her cheek, the tiny crease in her brow, the faint flutter of her eyelids as she dreamed. I told myself that no matter what was happening between Mark and me, this part was real. This part was untouched. The wonder of her existence collided violently with the betrayal unfolding beside us. Jai and the heartbreak pressed against each other, inseparable, tangled so tightly he could not tell where one ended and the other began. It felt unfair, almost cruel, that two such powerful truths could occupy the same space. He felt suddenly exhausted, not in the physical sense, but in a deeper way that reached into my bones. The kind of tired that comes from understanding that nothing will ever be simple again. Mark reached out tentatively, his hand hovering near my arm, unsure whether to make contact. The movement startled me, and he flinched before he could stop myself. He withdrew his hand immediately, shame flickering across his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The apology felt small, inadequate, swallowed by the enormity of what he had confessed. He did not respond. There was nothing he could say that would not feel incomplete or false. In that moment, wonder and grief coexisted in uneasy balance. He marveled at the life resting against my chest, at the miracle of her arrival, even as something essential inside me cracked quietly, irrevocably. He understood, with sudden clarity, that this was the beginning of a different story than the one he had planned. He did not yet know how he would survive it. All he knew was that in a room meant for beginnings, an ending had revealed itself, uninvited and undeniable, changing the shape of my life forever. After Mark spoke, the room did not react. Nothing shattered. No more alarms sounded. The lights did not flicker. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to the way my internal world had just fractured. My daughter slept against my chest, warm and trusting, her small body rising and falling as if nothing in the universe had changed. But everything had. He felt frozen in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with overload. My body was exhausted beyond anything he had ever experienced. Every muscle ached. My lower half felt distant, stitched, sore, and heavy, as if it belonged to someone else. My arms trembled faintly, not from weakness alone but from the aftershock of effort and the adrenaline wearing off too quickly. Beneath all of that physical sensation was something deeper, something hollow. It felt like emptiness had rushed in where certainty used to live. He stared at the wall across from me, my eyes unfocused, my mind struggling to process what had just been placed in front of me. The words replayed themselves without emotion at first, stripped of tone and meaning. In love with someone else. For months, he hadn't planned it. They sounded clinical, like data points, like facts listed without context. He knew what the words meant, yet my body refused to react the way stories say it should. He did not scream. He did not cry. He did not ask questions. He existed in a strange, suspended state where sound felt distant and time slowed to an almost unbearable crawl. My breathing was shallow, careful, as if drawing in too much air might shatter something fragile inside my chest. He looked down at my daughter. Her face was peaceful, untouched by the tension hanging in the room. Her tiny mouth was relaxed, her brow smooth, her hands resting loosely against my skin. She made a small sound in her sleep, a soft exhale that vibrated gently against my chest. That sound nearly broke me. A sharp wave of guilt rushed through me, unexpected and cruel. He worried that this moment, her fairest moments in the world, were being stained by pain she could not understand. He worried that somehow my shock, my stillness, my silence would imprint itself on her, that she would carry this weight unknownly into her life. The thought was irrational, but it lodged itself deep in my chest and he refused to move. He adjusted her blanket with hands that shook slightly, smoothing the fabric over her back, ensuring she was warm, ensuring she was protected. Focusing on her felt like the only thing anchoring me to reality. If he kept my attention on her, maybe the rest of it would fade into the background. It did not. Mark sat beside the bed, silent now, his presence heavy and awkward. I could feel him watching me, waiting for something. A reaction, a response, permission to continue speaking or absolution for what he had said. He gave him neither. He felt suddenly aware of how vulnerable he was. He was physically exposed, emotionally raw, and utterly unprepared to carry this conversation. He could not stand up and leave. He could not create distance. He was trapped in that bed, my body in recovery, my heart in free fall. The realization brought with it a deep, quiet despair. He had always believed that if something devastating happened, he would feel it immediately and completely. He imagined grief as a tidal wave, anger as fire, betrayal as something sharp and unmistakable. What he felt instead was silence, a spreading quiet that pressed in on itself, folding inward, as if a part of me had decided to shut down to survive. It reminded me of a shelf giving way slowly under too much weight, not crashing all at once, not splintering dramatically, but sagging, cracking, lowering inch by inch until everything it held slid off gently, almost politely. That was what it felt like inside me. A controlled collapse. I became acutely aware of my own body, the soreness between my legs, the tight pull of stitches, the ache in my lower back, the heaviness of my breasts beginning to swell with milk, life asserting itself physically even as my emotional foundation crumbled. The contrast was disorienting. He had just created life, and yet he felt emptied. He searched my thoughts for something familiar to cling to. Logic, anger, resolve. Nothing surfaced. Instead, memories drifted through my mind uninvited. Small moments from the past months replayed themselves with new meaning. Mark leaving the room to take phone calls. His distracted silences at dinner. The way he turned his phone face down on the table. At the time, he had dismissed these details as stress, as fatigue, as my own tendency to overanalyze. Now, each memory felt heavier, reshaped by hindsight. A part of me wanted to rewind time, to return to the version of myself who had trusted without hesitation, who believed the careful planning and the steady love were enough to keep things intact. That version of me felt impossibly far away now, like a photograph fading at the edges. He wondered, briefly and painfully, if he had missed something essential about him. If there had been signs he chose not to see because acknowledging them would have threatened the life he believed he was building. The thought brought a new ache, one rooted not just in betrayal, but in self-doubt. Had he been naive? The room felt colder. He noticed the hum of the ventilation system, the faint beep of a monitor somewhere down the hall, the distant murmur of voices outside the door. The world continued its routine, indifferent to the personal catastrophe unfolding within those four walls. That indifference hurt more than he expected. He shifted slightly, my body protesting the movement. Andy winced as pain flared briefly before settling again. The physical discomfort grounded me, reminding me that he was still here, still alive, still responsible for the small human resting against me. Responsibility. The word settled heavily in my chest. He was a mother now. No more matter what happened next, no more matter how my marriage fractured or reshaped itself. My daughter would need me. She would depend on me in ways that left no more room for collapse. The realization brought with it a mix of terror and determination. He felt unprepared. He had imagined motherhood as a transition filled with learning and adjustment, not one that demanded immediate emotional triage. He had planned for sleepless nights, not sleepless nights paired with heartbreak. He had prepared for diapers and feedings, not for rebuilding my sense of self from the ground up. Tears finally gathered in my eyes, but they did not fall. They hovered, sir, unshed, blurring my vision slightly. Crying felt dangerous, as if it might open a door he could not close again. He was not sure he could afford the kind of release yet. Mark spoke my name again, softly this time. He did not respond. He could not trust my voice. He did not know what it would carry if he let it out. Anger, grief, accusation. He was afraid that once he started, he would not be able to stop. And he did not have the strength for it. He shifted in his chair, the movement tentative, uncertain. He sensed his discomfort, his regret, his fear of what would come next. Normally, he would have responded to the discomfort, offered reassurance, smoothed the edges. That instinct was deeply ingrained in me. It was gone now. Instead, there was a growing awareness that something fundamental had changed in how he saw him. He was no more longer my safe place. He was no more longer the person he could lean into without reservation. That loss felt profound, more destabilizing than the confession itself. He stared at my daughter again, tracing the outline of her ear with my eyes, memorizing every detail. He promised myself silently that whatever pain he carried, he would not let it spill onto her, that she would not grow up feeling responsible for the fractures in my life. The promise felt heavy, but necessary. The hours that followed blurred together. Nurses returned to check vitals, to assist with breastfeeding, to offer gentle guidance. He nodded and he responded appropriately, performing the role expected of me with quiet efficiency. On the surface, he appeared calm, composed, even grateful. Inside, he was unraveling slowly. Each interaction required effort. Each polite response drained me further. He felt like he was operating on instinct alone, conserving energy for the most essential task, keeping my daughter safe and close. When the nurse finally left us alone again, night had fully settled outside the window. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance, blurred by glass and the exhaustion. The room felt smaller in the darkness, the shadows deeper. Mark sat silently, his hands clasped together, his head bowed. He looked small, diminished by the weight of his own actions. He felt no more satisfaction in it, only sadness. He realized then that this was the lowest point, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was quiet, because it was marked by the absence of certainty. By the slow recognition that the life he thought he was living no longer existed in the form he had trusted. He felt grief settle in, not as a wave, but as a steady pressure, a presence that would not be ignored. It wrapped itself around my ribs, tightened my throat, and sat heavily in my stomach. It did not demand immediate expression. It simply existed, patient and persistent. He closed my eyes briefly, careful not to disturb my daughter, and he let myself acknowledge the truth without trying to fix it. He was hurt, he was overwhelmed, he was afraid. And yet, beneath all of that, something else stirred. A quiet resolve, barely formed, but present. He did not know what the future would look like. He did not know how this story would continue. But he knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that he would endure. The shelf inside me had cracked, but it had not fallen completely. Andy, in that fragile space between breaking and becoming, he held my daughter close and he allowed myself, for the first time, to simply exist within the pain, knowing that surviving this moment was enough for now. Night arrived quietly, almost respectfully, as if the world outside the hospital understood that something delicate was unfolding inside that room. The sky beyond the window darkened from gray to deep blue, then finally to black, the city lights below blinking on one by one like distant, indifferent stars. Inside, the maternity ward settled into its nighttime rhythm. Voices softened, footsteps slowed, machines hummed more noticeably in the absence of conversation. Mark laughed without drama. There was no more argument, no more raised voices, no more final exchange meant to define the moment. He stood awkwardly near the door, his hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders slumped forward as if gravity had suddenly increased around him. He sighed my name once more, quietly, and he told me he would give me space. He nodded without looking up. He did not trust myself to meet his eyes. The door closed behind him with a gentle click that sounded far too polite for what it marked. When he was gone, the room felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but clearer. As if a fog had lifted just enough for me to see where he was standing, even if he still could not see where he was going. The air seemed easier to breathe. My chest still arched, still felt tight and bruised from holding back too much. But the sharpest edge of panic dulled slightly. My daughter slept in the bassinet beside my bed now, swaddled snugly, her tiny face turned toward me. He watched her chest rise and fall, counting her breaths without realizing he was doing it. The steady rhythm calmed me, anchored me in something real and undeniable. She was here. She was safe. Whatever else had fractured today had not touched the truth. A soft knock came at the door. Before he could respond, it opened slowly, and a nurse stepped inside. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, with silver threaded through her dark hair and reading glasses perched on top of her head. Hair scrubs were a soft blue, worn and familiar, the fabric creased in places that spoke of long shifts and countless patience. Her name read Carla. She glanced at me, then at the empty chair by the bed. Andy seemed to understand something immediately. Her expression did not change dramatically. There was no more pity, sir. No more forced cheer. Just recognition. Mind if he sit with you for a bit? She asked gently. He nodded. She pulled the chair closer and he sat down without hurry, her movements unhurried and grounded. She did not ask questions right away. She did not comment on the silence. She simply sat there, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her presence steady in a way that felt intentional. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The quiet was not uncomfortable. It felt earned, like a pause that allowed something fragile to catch its breath. He stared at the wall across from me, noticing the small imperfections in the paint, the faint scuff marks near the baseboard, ordinary details that suddenly felt important. Proof that the world had not ended even if my internal one felt rearranged. Carla broke the silence first. You had a long day, she sighed softly. It was such a simple statement, but it cracked something open in me. Not because it acknowledged the betrayal or the heartbreak or the shock, but because it acknowledged me, my body, my effort, what he had endured before anything else happened. He swallowed hard and he nodded. That's one way to put it, he sighed. My voice sounded rough, unused, like it had been waiting patiently for permission to exist again. Carla nodded, accepting the tone without comment. She glanced toward the bassinet. She's beautiful, she sighed. Strong cry too. You don't always hear that right away. The words landed gently, like a hand placed carefully on my shoulder. Pride flickered faintly beneath the exhaustion. He looked at my daughter again, seeing her through fresh eyes. Strong, alive. Here, thank you, he sighed. She feels bigger than he expected, like she takes up more space than she should. Carla smiled, not amused, but understanding. They do that, she sighed, not just physically. Something in her tone invited more, and before he could stop myself, words began to spill out. Not in a neat order, not in full sentences, just fragments, pieces of truth breaking free wherever they could find an opening. He told me, he sighed quietly, right after she was born. He told me he's in love with someone else. Carla did not guess. She did not interrupt. She did not rush to fill the space with reassurances or advice. She simply listened, her eyes steady on mine, her face open. He didn't know what to do. He continued. He couldn't feel anything at first. I still don't know what I'm supposed to feel. That makes sense, she sighed calmly. Your system's overloaded. Anyone's would be. He took a shaky breath, surprised by the relief of hearing that there was a reason for the numbness. That it was not a failure on my part. He kept thinking about her. He sighed, nodding toward the bassinet. about how this is the first day of her life. Andy, it's already complicated. Carla leaned back slightly, considering her words carefully before speaking. Babies don't know the story yet, she sighed. They only know how they're held, how they're fed, how they're loved. That part is already happening. The tightness in my chest eased just a fraction. He looked down at my hands, noticing how swollen my fingers were, how unfamiliar my own body felt. He thought, if something like this ever happened, he sighed slowly, I'd fall apart. I'd scream or cry or do something that made sense. But he just feel quiet. That quiet is doing important work, Carla replied. It's protecting you until you're ready. Her words settled over me, not as instructions, but as permission. Permission to now perform grief in a recognizable way. Permission to exist exactly as he was. He thought her more than about the months of pregnancy, about the subtle unease he had ignored, about the way his phone had felt like a small but growing presence between us. He spoke in halting phrases, sometimes stopping mid-sentence when the emotion surged too quickly. Each time, Carla waited. She did not finish my thoughts. She did not hurry me along. When my voice faltered, she simply nodded, signaling that he could take my time. He feels stupid, he admitted quietly, like he should have known. Carla shook her head gently. Trusting someone doesn't make you stupid, she sighed. It makes you human. That sentence landed harder than he expected. Tears finally spilled over, sliding down my cheeks silently. He did not sob, he did not break. The tears came slowly, steadily, as if my body had decided it was finally safe to release something. Carla passed me a tissue without comment. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next, he sighed after a moment. Everything he planned depended on us being US. That's true, she sighed, but not everything depends on that. Some things depend on you. He looked at her then, really looked at her, at the lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent witnessing beginnings and the endings alike, at the calm confidence in her posture. She had seen moments like this before. Not my exact story, but its shape. You did something powerful today, she continued. You brought a life into the world. You endured pain, uncertainty, fear, and the exhaustion, and you did it anyway. That matters. That says something about you that doesn't disappear just because someone else made a choice. Her words settled into me slowly, like seeds finding soil. He had spent so much of the day feeling emptied, reduced to reaction. Hearing someone name my strength felt almost foreign. He had not thought of myself as powerful. He had thought of myself as overwhelmed, wounded, unsure. Powerful felt different. You don't feel powerful, he sighed honestly. You don't have to, Carla replied. It's still, sir. She shifted slightly in her chair, her tone becoming more deliberate. There's something else I want you to hear, she sighed. Truth, even painful truth, gives people choices. You didn't have choices before. You were operating on incomplete information. The word struck deep. Choices. The idea felt distant but compelling. Until that moment, everything since the confession had felt like something happening to me. Something he was trapped inside. The notion that truth could return agency to me, rather than steal it, was not something he had considered. He didn't want this truth, he sighed quietly. No more one ever this, she sighed. But now you get to decide what comes next. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but eventually. Andy, that matters. He felt something shift then, subtle but undeniable. The tight band around my chest loosened slightly, allowing a fuller breath than he had taken since Mark spoke. It was not relief. It was not resolution. It was possibility. For the first time since the confession, he felt like he could inhale without it hurting. Carla stood after a while, smoothing the front of her scraps. I'll check on you again before my shift ends, she sighed. If you need anything before then, press the call button, even if you just need someone to sit with you. Thank you, he sighed, and he meant it with a depth that surprised me. After she left, he lay butt against the pillows, the room quiet once more. The silence felt different now, less suffocating, more spacious. He reached over and he placed my hand on the edge of the bassinet, my fingers resting near my daughter's tiny arm. He thought about what Carla had sighed, about power, about choice, about truth not as an ending, but as a beginning of something else, something unknown but not necessarily doomed. He did not suddenly feel healed. The pain was still there, waiting patiently. The fear had not vanished. The future remained uncertain and intimidating. But beneath all of that, something steadied. He was not just someone to whom this had happened. He was someone who could respond. As my daughter stirred softly in her sleep, he felt my chest rise and he fall with a new rhythm. One not dictated entirely by shock or grief. It was tentative, fragile, but it was mine. Andy in the quiet hospital room, under dim lights and watchful machines. He realized that this moment, as devastating as it had been, was also the first moment in which my story belonged fully to me again. The months that followed did not arrive with sharp edges or dramatic turning points. They came quietly, one after another, like unremarkable mornings that still demanded everything from me. So were no more sweeping gestures, no more sudden clarity, no more moment where he woke up and he felt healed. Instead, there was repetition. There was routine. There was the steady, unglamorous work of continuing. Emily became the center of my days and the nights in a way that was both grounding and exhausting. She woke every few hours at first, her cries thin and urgent in the dark. I learned to recognize the difference between a hungry cry and a tired one, between discomfort and fear. I learned how to lift her from the crib without fully waking myself, how to support her tiny head with one hand while fumbling with bottles or nursing pillows with the other. The nights were the hardest. The house was silent then, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. I would sit in the dim glow of a lamp, Emily cradled against me, her small body warm and impossibly heavy for something so new. My mind wandered during those hours, drifting toward memories he did not invite. The way Mark used to sleep beside me, the way he had imagined these nights would feel, shared and supported. But Emily needed me, fully and immediately. There was no more room for self-pity in those moments. Her need was absolute. And so he showed up, again and again, even when my eyes burned with exhaustion and my body ached in unfamiliar ways. Mark moved out within a month. There was no more dramatic confrontation when it happened. We spoke calmly, carefully, like two people negotiating the end of a business arrangement rather than the life we had built together. He packed his things in stages, taking clothes one weekend, books the next. Each box leaving the house felt like a quiet subtraction, not a loss marked by tears but by absence. We communicated through lawyers once the paperwork began. When we did speak directly, it was scheduled, contained, purposeful. Conversations happened at specific times, for specific reasons, and ended promptly. There was no more room for wandering into old habits or accidental intimacy. That boundary, though painful, was necessary. I learned quickly that anger came later. At first, there was numbness and fatigue, then sadness. The anger crept in slowly, catching me off guard in moments when I least expected it. It would be folding laundry or washing bottles when a wave of resentment would rise sharply, leaving me breathless. Anger at the betrayal, anger at the timing, anger at the fact that he had to navigate early motherhood while grieving a marriage. Therapy became our weekly anchor. My therapist's office was small and softly lit, with a couch that smelled faintly of lavender and the old books lining the walls. He sat there each week, sometimes talking non-stop, sometimes staring at the floor while searching for words. She did not rush me. She helped me name things he had been afraid to acknowledge. She reminded me that healing was not linear, that some days would feel manageable, even hopeful, and the others would feel heavy and discouraging, that both were part of the process. He leaned on my parents more than he ever had before. They drove in from Cedar Rapids every weekend, sometimes staying the night, sometimes just long enough to give me a few hours of rest. My mother cooked meals and he filled my freezer without asking what he wanted. My father fixed small things around the house, tightening loose screws, adjusting doors that no longer closed properly. They did not ask many questions about Mark. They followed my lead, offering support without pressure. There was comfort in that familiarity, in being someone's daughter again, even briefly, in knowing he was not navigating this entirely alone. Slowly, he learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. That distinction surprised me. Loneliness had always frightened me, something he associated with failure or absence. But being alone became something else entirely. It became quiet space. Time where he could think without interruption, where he could grieve without an audience. He developed small routines that were just mine and Emily's. Morning walks around the neighborhood, her stroller rolling all for cracked sidewalks while he breathed in fresh air. Afternoon naps where we rested together on the couch, sunlight streaming through the window. Evening bats that ended with her wrapped in a towel, blinking up at me with complete trust. Those moments stitched something back together inside me. So were setbacks, of course, paperwork deadlines that overwhelmed me, legal conversations that reopened wounds, nights when Emily cried inconsolably and he questioned every decision he had made, days when he missed the idea of my marriage more than the reality of it. But there were also quiet victories. The first time he laughed genuinely again, surprised by the sound of my own voice. The first time he realized an entire day had passed without thinking about Mark. The first time he caught my reflection and he saw someone who looked tired but capable. Healing did not announce itself. It arrived in subtle shifts, in the way my breathing felt less shallow, in the way my shoulders relaxed when he entered my own home, in the way he began to imagine a future that was not defined solely by loss. He was not fixed, he was not finished, but he was moving forward, step by careful step, and in the steady rhythm of caring for my daughter, rebuilding my sense of self. He understood that progress did not need to be loud to be real, it only needed to continue. A year passed not as a single movement, but as a collection of ordinary days that slowly gathered meaning. When you look back on the time now, it does not appear as a blur. It appears as a sequence of moments, each one small on its own, each one quietly shaping the life he was learning to live. The townhouse came into my life in early spring. It was modest, 2 stories with pale siding and a narrow driveway, tucked into a quiet neighborhood just outside Cedar Rapids. The real estate listing described it as practical, well-maintained, and family-friendly. None of those words stirred anything emotional in me at first. He was not searching for a dream home. He was searching for a place that felt steady. The first time he walked through it, Emily was strapped against my chest in a soft carrier, her weight familiar and comforting. The rooms were empty, echoing slightly as my footsteps moved across the clean floors. Sunlight streamed through the back windows, landing in warm patches on the carpet. The backyard was small, enclosed by a simple wooden fence, with a patch of grass that showed signs of recent care. Nothing about it was grand. Everything about it felt possible. I remember standing in the kitchen, Emily's head resting just beneath my chin, and realizing that my chest felt calm. Not excited, not anxious, just calm. That was how he knew it was right. Moving, they arrived quietly. My parents helped again, just as they had during so many transitions all for the past year. Boxes were stacked neatly, labeled with careful handwriting. Emily watched from her playmat as we carried pieces of our life into this new space. Her eyes followed every movement, curious and alert. She did not cry. She seemed to accept the change without question, as if teaching me something in the process. When he placed her down on the living room floor for the first time, sunlight spilled across her legs. She kicked happily, fascinated by the brightness. That moment stayed with me. It felt symbolic without trying to be. A new beginning that did not demand ceremony. The backyard became our favorite place almost immediately. In the afternoons, when the sun angled just right, you would spread a blanket on the grass and sit beside Emily as she explored the world at her own pace. She learned how to crawl there, her movements determined and uncoordinated. He cheered softly each time she reached a new spot, careful not to overwhelm her. Watching her grow filled me with a quiet pride that did not need validation. Returning to work part-time was another step toward myself. The hospital welcomed me back with familiarity. The smell of antiseptic, the rhythm of the shifts, the steady hum of responsibility all felt grounding. I worked fewer hours, careful not to overextend myself. At first, I worried that stepping back into my professional role would feel overwhelming. Instead, it reminded me of who he had been before my world narrowed around crisis. He was still capable, still skilled, still needed. Balancing work and motherhood required adjustment. So were mornings when he moved slowly, packing Emily's bag while drinking coffee that had gone cold. So were evenings when exhaustion pressed down on me like a weight. But so was also satisfaction, a sense of balance returning, piece by piece. Mark and I finalized our divorce that summer. The paperwork was signed in a quiet office with neutral walls and a minimal conversation. So were no more raised voices, no more accusations. We had already signed everything that needed to be signed in earlier months. By the time the final documents were complete, what remained between us was not anger, but understanding. We spoke briefly afterward, standing outside in the warm air. He asked about Emily. He answered honestly. We wished each other well. When we parted ways, he felt no more urge to look back. Acceptance did not arrive as forgiveness. It arrived as clarity. He began to understand that my family had not vanished. It had changed shape. It now consisted of Emily and me, surrounded by people who showed up consistently. It was smaller, but it was real. So were moments of reflection that surprised me. One afternoon, while folding laundry in the townhouse, he caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. He paused, noticing the woman looking back at me. She looked older than she had a year ago, but also steadier. There was a softness in her expression that had not been there before, a resilience shaped by experience rather than optimism. He smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. Emily's first birthday arrived quietly. We celebrated with a small gathering in the backyard. My parents, a few close friends, a homemade cake with too much frosting. Emily smeared icing across her face and he laughed at the attention. He watched her carefully, taking in the details. The curve of her cheeks, the sound of her laugh, the way she looked to me instinctively when overwhelmed. That night, after everyone left and the house returned to silence, he held her close and he thought about how far we had come. There were still challenges ahead. Parenting alone required constant decision-making. There were days when he felt stretched thin, but there was also confidence, a growing trust in my ability to navigate whatever came next. He no longer measured my life against what he had lost. Instead, he paid attention to what he was building. The townhouse filled with routines. Morning light through the kitchen window. Evening walks around the block. Quiet nights where he read while Emily slept upstairs. These were not dramatic moments. They were the foundation of our life that felt sustainable. Peace did not arrive as a single feeling. It arrived as the absence of constant tension, as the ability to breathe deeply without bracing for disappointment, as the recognition that joy could exist alongside grief without diminishing either. He had not chosen this path, but he had chosen how to walk it. And standing in that small backyard, watching my daughter take unsteady steps toward me, he understood something with clarity. Resolution was not about returning to who he had been. It was about becoming someone new, shaped by truth, grounded in love, and the open to what came next. Today arrives differently than yesterday, and differently than the day in the hospital that wants to find everything. Today does not announce itself with pain or revelation. It enters quietly, carried in ordinary moments that would have gone unnoticed by the woman he used to be. Morning light spills across the kitchen floor of our townhouse. The coffee maker hums. The house wakes slowly, gently, without urgency. Emily's laughter comes from the living room. It is sudden and bright, the kind of sound that fills space without asking permission. She laughs with her whole body now. Her head tips back, her mouth opens wide, and her eyes squeeze shut as if the joy inside her has nowhere else to go. I pause where I am, my hands resting on the counter, and let the sound wash over me. Every time I hear it, something inside me stills. It is impossible not to think of that hospital room, of the thing that first announced her arrival, of the way Joe and heartbreak collided in the same breath. Two truths arriving at once, neither waiting its turn. One that shattered everything he thought he knew. One that gave me a reason to keep standing when the ground shifted beneath me. For a long time, I thought he would have to choose which truth mattered more. I thought acknowledging my pain would somehow diminish the miracle of my daughter, or that embracing my joy would mean minimizing the loss of the life he had planned. It took time, and a great deal of quiet reflection, to understand that both truths could exist without canceling each other out. They still do. Motherhood did not save me in a dramatic sense. It did not erase my grief or smooth the edges of betrayal. What it did was anchor me. It gave my days a rhythm when my thoughts felt chaotic. It demanded my presence when he would have preferred to disappear into questions with no more answers. I am still a mother. That identity did not weaken under pressure. It strengthened. It expanded. It learned how to function alongside disappointment and fear. It learned how to show up even when my heart felt bruised. It learned how to laugh without conditions, without guarantees, without certainty. I am still strong. That strength does not look like what he once imagined. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It lives in my ability to sit with discomfort without fleeing from it. It lives in the way I make decisions now, slower and more deliberate. It lives in my willingness to trust myself, even when outcomes remain uncertain. There are moments when memories resurface unexpectedly. A song on the radio, a smell that reminds me of antiseptic and warm linens, a passing comment from another parent about delivery rooms and supportive partners. When that happens, the ache returns briefly, like an old injury reminding me of its existence. I no longer fight it. I acknowledge it and let it pass. Grief has become something equally, not something that carries me. Emily toddles into the kitchen, her steps unsteady but confident. She reaches for me, arms lifted without hesitation. I scoop her up, feeling the solid warmth of hair against my chest. She presses her cheek to my shoulder, content and trusting. She does not know the story yet. She does not know how close he came to feeling undone. One day, she may ask questions. One day, she may want to understand where we came from and why our family looks the way it is. When the day comes, you will tell her the truth, carefully and honestly, shaped by age and understanding. But for now, she only knows that she is safe. That knowledge matters more than any explanation. I have learned that joy does not always arrive the way we expect it to. Sometimes it comes through survival rather than celebration. Sometimes it grows quietly in the space left behind by what we lost. I once believed that loss only took things away. Now I understand that it can also make room. Room for clarity. Room for self-respect. Room for a life that fits who you are becoming, not who you were trying to be. I no longer measure my happiness against a checklist of milestones achieved on schedule. I no longer chase the version of myself who believed security meant predictability. I have learned that resilience is not about avoiding pain. It is about learning how to live honestly in its presence. So are days when I feel deeply grateful, not in a performative way, not in a way that denies how hard it was, but grateful for the strength he discovered when he had no more choice but to keep going. Grateful for the people who showed up without being asked. Grateful for the version of myself who chose truth all for comfort, even when the truth hurt. And yes, grateful for the joy that followed. Joy that feels earned rather than assumed. Joy that sits calmly beside memory instead of trying to replace it. Joy that exists not despite loss, but sometimes because of it. When he tuck Emily into bed at night, he linger longer than necessary. He watch her chest rise and fall, the same way it did in those early hours after she was born. The world feels quieter then, simpler. You think about how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. I am still here. I am still standing. I am still capable of loving deeply, of trusting again, of building a life rooted in honesty rather than illusion. That hospital room will always exist in my memory as a place where two truths met. One that broke my heart open, one that rebuilt it piece by piece. They arrived together, and together, they shaped the woman I am today.